Which of these games is easier? Fortnite or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds? PUBG is often seen as a hardcore milsim type game, and Fortnite a kid-friendly cartoon shooter. But does one of these games actually require more skill than the other? Now I know what you're thinking. In fact, that's a lie, because I've no doubt what you're thinking is entirely different, because I could ask 100 people the question and I've got no doubt that I'd get a massive mix and range of answers. But it raised an interesting line of thought with me, because I think both of these games have a very high skill ceiling, but in vastly different ways. Let's get into the meat and bones of this though and see if we can get a better understanding of it. To begin with, let's look at the obvious, the gunplay mechanics. After all, shooting is probably what you'll do most of the time in both of these games. And as we all know, PUBG is grounded in reality and prides itself on that fact. You've got loads of bullet drop on the snipers, on the assault rifles, you've got big recoil and spread on all of the weapons, especially something like the AK-47 or the M249. And you ideally need to find good attachments for your weapons to make them handle how you'd like them to. Projectile speeds of the guns vary wildly too. Gunplay at medium to long range in PUBG especially requires you to leave long gaps between your shots and lead your targets more. Every shot needs to be placed carefully, and knowing what the right attachments are for the right situation can be difficult. Fortnite, on the other hand, is far more easy to manage when it comes to weaponry. Sure, you do have big drop on the sniper rifles, the bolt action, new hunting rifle and semi-auto sniper are actually projectile based, where all of the other guns in the game are hit scan, and you don't have to worry about recoil so much. At close to medium range, it really is just point and click when it comes to the assault rifles in Fortnite, especially if you're crouching. You can hold mouse 1, track your target and be very effective. There's barely any recoil there, although there is some spread. Obviously the rarity of your assault rifle affects that too though. Shotguns on the other hand in Fortnite, well, you can hop around like a bunny rabbit like nobody's business with them, because the game doesn't punish you for moving around or jumping while shooting. In fact, it almost promotes it with the building mechanics. It's part of the meta. We'll get onto that soon. PUBG, on the other hand, massively punishes you for moving, jumping and shooting at the same time, and it does require you to take care of your movement when firing your weapons. So let's talk about that movement then. In PUBG, movement is pretty straightforward and it's what you would expect. Of course, you can jump, walk, sprint, just like in Fortnite, but for the most part in PUBG, you're limited to where you can go. You can head into a building or take cover behind a tree or a wall, and players who play the game long enough can get a good understanding of where a player can be. If there's a group of houses that you're running towards, you already know that in your head, a guy can't possibly be on that roof because that particular roof is inaccessible. But in Fortnite, because of the building mechanics, it's a completely open playing field. Players can destroy pretty much anything on the map, trees, buildings, cars, rocks, and get pretty much anywhere they like because they can build there. And that changes the way you have to think, because it breaks the rules of what you're used to in other PvP games, and you've got to be far more on your guard. Someone could literally be anywhere in Fortnite, even 1,000 feet in the air. And that brings us nicely onto the building aspect, because honestly, it's the biggest part of Fortnite, and I think it's what sets it apart from other BR games like PUBG the most. The building is the hardest and arguably easiest part of the game. It's very simple to understand and to do. I mean, if you just want to build a ramp, build a wall, you can do it with the press of a button. That's not difficult. But building the right pieces at the right time and quick enough to not only stop yourself from being hit, but also to use as an attacking tool on other players is extremely difficult under pressure. You've got to think about a lot of stuff at once, in a very short amount of time, if you want to consistently beat your opponents. And that's what separates the main gameplay from Battlegrounds. If a team or squad of enemies is coming towards you, in Fortnite you can put up a wall, a ramp, you can get back to cover, you could build a bouncy boy, fly out of there, or you could build high towards them and try to get that advantage instead. Of course, it's a risk-reward scenario though, because cover can be destroyed, and if you're high up in the air and they destroy the building that you're on, you're in trouble. The other benefit to being able to build your own cover in Fortnite is that it reduces the annoyance of being caught out in the middle of nowhere with zero cover, something that can happen quite often in PUBG, especially if you've been forced to move because of the random circle. In Fortnite, if you find yourself in a situation like that where you're out in the open with no cover, someone starts shooting at you, you know what, spin around, throw up a wall, and you've got a chance to get away or get some cover. Of course, if you're in a squad fight in PUBG, you'll still have to think about a few things at once though, but I'd say that the pressure is a lot less than it is in Fortnite. In PUBG, when you get into, let's say, the last circle, controlling the only building in the zone, it could win you your game for your squad. But in Fortnite, you could build it yourself. If you watch someone who's incredible at the game, like Ninja or Myth for example, two big Twitch streamers who have blown up recently from playing Fortnite, their building skills are just insane. It's so fast and they're always thinking a few moves ahead. Now as it happens, these two players also have great aim, but in Fortnite I think someone who masters the building mechanics can potentially outplay someone who's got a stronger aim than them. Maybe they're not as good an aimer, but if they're efficient with building, then they could outplay their opponent. In PUBG though, put two players in equal positions with the same guns, and the chances are that the stronger aimer will always win, for the most part. In Fortnite, you can just offset some of your aim and compensate for it with your building skills. It's arguably more important. On the flip side, I think you could argue though that because you're stuck with the cover that you're given and the circle controls your fate, planning where to go next and reposition in PUBG can be quite difficult. At times it's hard to know in PUBG if you made the right call and moved to the right spot. Of course the maps in PUBG are much bigger than the standard Fortnite map too. So if we're talking about broad strokes, the building element is definitely what sets these two games apart. You could argue that aiming a weapon like the Kar 98 in Battlegrounds and accommodating for drop and lead takes more skill. But you could say that building efficiently with walls, ramps, floors to outmaneuver three guys and win a situation that was otherwise unwinnable takes more skill than that. Obviously they both take skill, but they're just massively different types of skill. If you look at a close range firefight in PUBG versus Fortnite, in Fortnite they tend to be a lot quicker and more violent. The game is definitely more arcadey in that respect. Gunfights in PUBG on the other hand are definitely much more drawn out. So I think that reaction speed and snap aiming plays much more of an effect in a game like Fortnite. Gathering materials is another aspect of Fortnite that you just can't take for granted, especially in early game. To build and survive you'll need materials, but of course when you're farming them you're going to be vulnerable. There's a fine balance I think between when to fight and when to farm materials, especially when you know that enemies are around. Enemies can see trees falling down or hear car alarms going off while you're farming, and you can be a bit of a sitting duck. Of course you can also grab materials off enemies when you kill them, assuming that they've got some. One thing that PUBG has definitely got going for it is that you can visually see what level a player's armour is at, and that definitely requires you to tactically think about an engagement. Should you take that fight or not? Should you push? Should you be defensive? You can see if a player's got a level 3 helmet or a level 3 chest armour on, and then you know from your learnt experiences how much damage you can do potentially with a headshot for example. You often have to work out for yourself how much damage you think you could have done to know if you should perhaps swap out to another weapon. In Fortnite some of that skill is definitely taken away and given to you for free because you're given damage stats on your screen with every single hit. It tells you if you're doing blue shield damage or white health damage, and even if you get a critical hit in yellow. So you could argue that knowing when to push someone in Fortnite is made that bit easier by knowing that you've knocked someone's armour off or hit them in the head. Therefore in PUBG you really have to be paying attention yourself and use your learned knowledge to decide that. Perhaps that means that knowing when you've got an advantage over your opponent is harder in PUBG. What about the armour and equipment element of both of these games? Well, in terms of armour, health and shield, Fortnite is very simple to understand. You've got a health bar, and if you find a potion, you can add your shield. And this is effectively giving you more health. With PUBG, however, there are helmets and chest armour, 3 levels of each, and they can take damage and eventually break. And it doesn't simply equate to more health either, instead it's damage mitigation. So that means that managing your armour and keeping tabs on it and knowing when you should maybe swap something out is something that you don't have to worry about in Fortnite because it simply doesn't exist in that game. So there's definitely more depth therefore in the health and armour system of PUBG. In my opinion. I think the same can be said for the inventory management too. In Fortnite you've got room for 5 inventory slots plus any traps or campfires. It's very simple and easy to understand. PUBG on the other hand, well you can only carry 2 primary weapons and 1 secondary, but then you can add and remove attachments to them. And then you've got 3 different backpacks that have different capacity levels, and you've got a chest armor that has a capacity level, painkillers, meds, boosts. You've got to manage your ammunition too. That takes up space on your character and you need to take all of that into account. The composition of your character's loot is very important in a round of PUBG. It's a big part of the meta. Fortnite, on the other hand, ammunition doesn't take up space in your inventory, and you can just run over it to pick it up, and generally speaking, every game of Fortnite, I'd say it's fair to say that if you've got a SCAR, a shotgun, and a sniper, you're good to go. Expanding on this idea, looting in PUBG is definitely more complex. Loot can spawn in more places, and having to locate the right ammo types for the right guns or locate the right scope can be tricky at times. I thought that I should mention the camera too, as that's got a big effect on gameplay. Fortnite at the moment is played only in third person. That means that you can see your character and get a wide field of view. And so it's easier to get a feel for your surroundings, to build, and even see around corners or above walls that you're hiding behind. PUBG has a third person mode too, but if you want a really tough challenge in PUBG, try playing exclusively on first person perspective only servers. It makes a massive difference to the gameplay, and you've really got to be paying attention to your movement and positioning. If you want to peek a corner, you've got to do it with your body and put yourself in danger rather than just using the camera. First person only servers tend to attract the more competitive players too, so the standard of players that you'll be going up against will typically be higher skilled in that game mode. There are other factors that make the games different though, for instance early game. In Fortnite I think early game is more exciting, and if you drop, get a weapon which has already got ammo in it by the way, unlike in PUBG, then you can smartly take out players or another squad before they even get a chance to equip themselves properly. This is helped by the fact that the game runs extremely smoothly, and I've not really encountered any big lag or early game problems with netcode, unlike in PUBG where that does happen quite frequently from time to time. And while that doesn't separate the games in terms of skill, it does make a big difference to player enjoyment, and early game firefights in Fortnite can definitely be easier to handle sometimes when the game is running better. What about visibility? How easy is it to see other players in these games? Well, in Fortnite, because of the art style, the characters are usually quite bulky, cartoony and colourful, and so players stick out like a sore thumb in this game and are very easy to spot. The simplicity of the graphics helps too. PUBG though, especially in first person only servers, is completely different. Players wear dark uniforms and camouflage that can help them blend into the surroundings, the bushes, the shade of trees. Because PUBG is way more visually complex than Fortnite, it can be very hard sometimes to spot enemy players, and usually you're better relying on the sound of the bullet or looking for muzzle flash to find out where you're being shot from. In conclusion, both games have different elements of skill trapped within their own ecosystems, and neither one is better or worse in my eyes. I think they're both incredibly fun games. Really, it's like comparing apples to oranges, but I thought it was interesting to see how these two games differ massively and what makes you good, bad, or godlike. Is one easier than the other though? Well, I don't think so. Fortnite is definitely more accessible than PUBG and easier to understand, pick up and play, but it's hard to master, and the skill gap between the good players and exceptionally good players is huge when you throw in the building element. PUBG can be punishing as hell to play. Map knowledge, handling your weapons well and positioning is super important, and knowing when to be aggressive, when to be defensive and hold, and where to move next for the next circle is the key to success. With that said guys, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this topic down below. Which game do you think is easier? Which game do you think takes more skill, or are they just different beasts entirely? Let me know down below. And that's all for today folks. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like down below, thank you. If you didn't like it, dislike it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one.